Extremely sorry, Mr. Anirudh, there has been some issue.
No issue. So the Indrasani judgment says, coming back to the, and I quote, coming back to the question of identification, the fact remains that one has to begin somewhere with some group, class, or section. There is no set or recognized method. There is no law or other statutory instrument prescribing the methodology. If so, one can well begin with castes, which represent explicit identifiable social classes groupings, more particularly when Article 16.4 seeks to ameliorate social backwardness. So one can well begin with castes and then go to other groups, classes, and communities. Caste was supposed to be only the starting point, and of course, if a caste by itself is so positive to the identification test that the whole caste can be declared as a backward caste, it may well be a class within itself. In 783, the court is again very clear in para number 783 with respect to the same issue. It reads 783. Right there, just above this giant. We do not mean to suggest we may deteriorate 783. It's right here. That the procedure indicated herein above is the only procedure or method approach to be adopted. Indeed, there is no such thing as a standard or module procedure approach. It is for the authority appointed to identify, to adopt such approach and procedure as it thinks appropriate, and so long as the approach is fair and adequate, the court has no say in the matter. The only object of discussion in the preceding para is to emphasize that its commission authority begins its process of identification with castes among Hindus and occupational groupings, among others. It cannot by that reason alone be said to be constitutionally or legally bad. Here I'll pause. It says if it begins the process of identification. It does not say where it has to end the process of identification. We must also, I'm reading further, we must also say that there is no rule of law that a test to be applied for identifying backward classes should be only one and or uniform. In a vast country like India, it is simply not practicable if the real object is to discover and locate backwardness, and if such backwardness is found in a caste, it can be treated as backward. If it is found in any other group, section, or class, they too can be treated as backwards. Hence, it's a flexible test and it's left to the community to decide, for the authority to decide. And various communities, therefore, can be identified. But then, the idea is to cover the whole of the population. As stated in para 782. Placetum D, across placetum D, para 782. Around where it is written D on the right side, placetum D, if you could just put the cursor there. It says, this does not mean that one can wind up the process of identification with the castes. Besides caste, whether found among Hindus or others, there may be other communities, group, classes, or denominations which may qualify as backward class of citizens. For example, in a particular state, so and so was found backward. Hence, you cannot end the process with caste. You may well begin the process with caste. Another criteria which was there before the Indra Sahni bench was in para 800. In para 800 of the Indra Sahni judgment, it talks about Chitralekha judgment, State of Mysore versus Chitralekha. In this, actually, there was an identification of the backward classes through the test of occupation cum income. If I read para 800 in Chitralekha, this court held. Before that, if we just read the question B, whether a backward class can be identified on the basis of occupation cum income without reference to caste. We have already seen in para 783 that the court said that we are not prescribing any one particular rule. Therefore, in para 800, the court says in Chitralekha, this court held that such an identification is permissible based on occupation cum income without reference to caste. We see no reason to differ from the said view in as much as this is but another method to find socially backward classes. Indeed, this test in the Indian context is broadly the same as one adopted by the Mandal Commission. While answering question 3b, we said that identification of backward classes can be done with reference to castes along with other occupational groups, communities, and classes. We did not say that this is the only permissible method. Indeed, there may be some groups or classes in whose case caste may not be relevant to all. For example, agricultural laborers, rickshaw pullers, drivers, street hawkers, etc. may well qualify for being designated as backward classes. Now let's pause here for a moment. Now we all know that the current identification of backward classes might be leaving out a lot of rickshaw pullers, street hawkers from the list of beneficiaries, at least under 15.4 and 16.4 and 15.5, as it was before the constitutional amendments which identified economically weaker section, which are under challenge, which may survive, may not survive. So the earlier list, of course, excluded many rickshaw pullers, many agricultural laborers, many landless laborers, many daily workers from the list of backward classes. So interestingly, this issue also came before Ashok Kumar Thakur. But before we go to Ashok Kumar Thakur, we have covered that caste can be the beginning point, but caste cannot be the sole or the dominant criteria for identification of backward classes. There is no one particular method of identifying backward classes. That's the second point. Caste can well be a class if the caste is so backward and can qualify for affirmative action under 16.4 and 15.4. In para 802, which comes next, is the interesting analysis between goldsmith and stonecutters. This is the majority judgment of Justice Jeevan Reddy, as his lordship then was. It starts in the preceding page. We are of the opinion that there is no constitutional or legal bar to a state categorizing the backward classes as the backward and more backward. We are not saying that it ought to be done. We are concerned with the question if a state makes such a categorization, whether it would be invalid. We think not. Let us take the criteria evolved by Mandal Commission. Any caste group or class which scored 11 or more points was treated as a backward class. Now it is not as if all of the several thousand of caste group classes scored identical points. There may be some caste group classes which have scored points 20 to 22, and there may be some who have scored points between 11 and 13. It cannot reasonably be denied. There is no difference between these two sets of caste group classes. To give an illustration, take two occupational groups, viz. Goldsmith and Vaddes, traditional stone cutters in Andhra Pradesh, both included within other backward classes. None can deny that goldsmiths are far less backward than Vaddes. If both of them are grouped together and reservation provided, the inevitable result will be that goldsmiths would take away all the reserved posts, leaving none for the Vaddes. So as a matter of fact, as to what, as per the media reports which are coming out with respect to finding of Rohini Commission, all these fears are actually coming correct. Hence, when we are talking about constitutional parameters of identification, we are also talking about reasonableness of that identification, because here Justice Reddy says it cannot reasonably be denied that there is no difference between these two sets of caste group classes. And the whole question is, then why were they tagged together? If it's not a reasonable classification, and the classification has to be reasonable with the object sought to be achieved, that is, of providing constitutional support and social justice to the downtrodden and the backward classes and the backward castes. So this unreasonable grouping, I don't think does any justice to the actually the more backward among the backwards. Let's talk about this manner, because we have to reach to the last man standing. Hence, we always have to take steps from the well-off categories to the backward classes, back from the backward classes to the more backward classes, and then to the extremely backward classes. So if we group goldsmiths and traditional stonecutters together, what we are going to get is not social justice for all, because it would be denied to some, because again it will be an unequal competition. But the problem of having equal competition in a social domain is again an experiment. And that is why now we go to the paragraph which might be the most controversial paragraph, that is para 827, 828 of the Indra Sani judgment. For many, it would sound as most controversial. But then if we look at the comparison that Justice Reddy brings out for us to analyze from a reasonable man's perspective of having the goldsmith and the stonecutter in the same list and making them compete against each other, then we would appreciate this paragraph. If we come down to the next page, then we have the relevant part. Quoting Rangachari, Indra Sani judgment says, just above para number 828, the last few lines, please leave the screen like this. If it could go a bit up. Could you go to para 827, move a little up, a little bit up. Thank you, that's it. The proposition emerging from the majority opinion in Rangachari have set out in para 823 under proposition D, as set out in para 823. The majority does say that in providing for reservation of appointments of posts under Article 16.4, the state has to take into consideration the claims of the members of the backward classes consistently with the maintenance of efficiency of administration. It must not be forgotten that the efficiency of administration is of such paramount importance that it would be unwise and impermissible to make any reservation at the cost of efficiency of administration. That undoubtedly is the effect of Article 335. Reservation of appointment or post may theoretically and conceivably mean some impairment of efficiency, but then it explains it by saying, but the risk involved in sacrificing efficiency of administration must always be borne in mind when any state sets about making a provision for reservation of appointment or posts. 828, we see no justification to multiply the risk which would be the consequence of holding that reservation can be provided in the matter of promotion. Hence, the court takes it as a social experiment and as a risk to the efficiency of governance, because one of the primary questions which faces us when we are trying to formulate any method of affirmative action or any method of reservation is this, that whether any policy of affirmative action has to be put into operation efficiently or inefficiently. If there is an Ujjwala scheme, gas distribution scheme, or free ration scheme, or below poverty line scheme, would you like it to be an efficient scheme or an inefficient scheme? If you would like the affirmative action scheme to be efficient, then there has to be overall efficiency in the system. So that is where the court recognizes this as a social experiment and as a risk. There's also the risk of the actual deserving people not getting the benefit of the scheme. As Justice Reddy himself gave out the example of goldsmiths and the stone cutters. And that is wherein the creamy layer principle also sets in. That if you have gone ahead so much of the group, of the homogeneous group, which is identified, if it is a caste, by the occupation, by the social standard of living, if you have already got cut off from that, then you don't deserve to be part of that group, that class. Because if you enter into that class, having already progressed financially, socially, then you don't belong to that class. You may well belong to that caste. So that is the creamy layer principle also. And it's a principle of reasonableness. Further, what happens when a person in a country where partition suits and matrimonial suits nowadays are orders of day, and the family itself is at the risk of disintegrating. In fact, we find very less joint family properties today, at least in the urban areas. It's not necessary that someone who is from that caste, when he progresses in life, he may well take care of his own family members, leave alone his caste. Hence, the process of identifying and going below and finding the correct beneficiary of the affirmative action programs is a continuous process. And that's why the court says that there has to be a periodic revision. Indira Sahni's judgment said, make a commission, let the commission do the job. We don't agree totally with the Mandal Commission list. For the time being, we are going ahead with the list. But we have full faith in the commission. We must full faith in the belief, full faith that a system will be evolved where a commission would be set up, like the National Commission for Backward Classes was set up, which would go into inclusions and exclusions so that the list is updated. It reflects the weaker sections of the society. It reflects the right beneficiary who deserve to be uplifted, and it does not become a mere eyewash. So coming to the conclusion that I would again reiterate that there is no particular criteria or constitutional parameter for identification. It's actually a policy decision of the state, and every decision that you take would leave out some of the beneficiary who could have qualified. Sometimes street hawkers would be left out. Sometimes landless workers will be left out. Sometimes hawkers may be left out. Sometimes rickshaw pullers may be left out. Sometimes a particular caste which should have got the benefit would be left out. It's just an experiment with a noble objective to help as many of the underprivileged as possible, but with dominant caste clamoring to get the largest share of their pie. Let us see how long it remains the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Anirudh. In fact, like it's been more than 10 years for me in this profession, but only today I really got to understand the gist of Indira Sahni. You put it so simply that now actually all of us have a clear idea as to what the judgment actually said. And thanks a lot for highlighting the relevant paragraphs in the judgment. I think, in fact, everyone in this group has benefited a lot in trying to understand what Indira Sahni has actually said. Before we start the question and answer session, or in case if anyone in the group has any questions, you can switch on your videos and ask your questions. Before that, may I only just ask just to understand the present position, like you referred to us the Indira Sahni's judgment. Now the recent conflict between Nagaraj and subsequent Singh's judgment, if you could just tell us in just 2-3 lines, what exactly is the reconciliation now being done by the Supreme Court in terms of?
See, as far as the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes are concerned, they are already identified by the Constitution through a particular process. And after a particular survey, and through the test of untouchability. for the scheduled caste and for the scheduled tribes that they should have been cut off from the mainstream of social life. Scheduled castes are identified through the historical test of untouchability, whereas the scheduled tribes, they have been given the benefit of an affirmative action program because they never integrated into the society. Right. So generally we have scheduled caste in the forest area, scheduled tribes in the forest areas in the northeast, which were cut off from the mainstream. Right. And that is why we have a concept of scheduled areas as well. Right. Which were earlier occupied totally by the tribes. They have a particular way of living. They have their own cultural codes and conducts. So they are not part of the mainstream of the society. While the scheduled castes, though they may be part of the, they may be found in the mainstream of the society, they had the stigma and they suffered the injustice of being declared as untouchables. So the constitution itself identifies them and protects them. And so when the court said in Nagraj, there is a background to Nagraj. After the reservation and promotions for OBCs was struck down by the constitution bench of Indira Sahni, reservation for promotion for SC and ST was also done away with because of the effect of Indira Sahni judgment, as I read that paragraph. So two new provisions, Article 16(4)A and 4B were introduced in the Constitution of India. Now the constitutionality of those were tested in Nagraj. So Nagraj laid down the basic concepts of affirmative action, program, and tested Article 16(4)A and 4B under those tests. So while reiterating the general propositions of reservation, it said that backwardness has to be identified. And then tested 16(4)A, 16(4)B. This position was clarified later in the Singh judgment, as we were talking about, that SC and ST's backwardness is already identified, unlike SCBCs, which is a floating body and which was not earlier constitutionally recognized. Now they have got in a constitutional amendment in Article 366 as well as Article 338, providing for a commission. Let's see how it works, how its role is interpreted, and how much of sanctity the court gives to it. Because the court says that you have to review the list every 5 years and 10 years. Indira Sahni said 10 years and Ashok Kumar Thakur said 5 years. So there's actually no conflict. The later judgment says that yes, Nagraj lays down the general proposition of reservation for backwards. But in terms of SCs and STs, it's already defined by the constitution and there's a presumption. So there is no conflict. So it clarifies, it does not get into conflict with the Nagraj judgment.
Thanks a lot. And just now, because the constitutionality of the economically weaker forward communities, that is also under challenge. Can you just briefly share your views on the constitutionality of?
See, Mandal did say, Mandal judgment as a whole, it said two things, Indira Sahni judgment. One, that the society will keep changing. Number one, we cannot for perpetuity lay down who will be a backward class and who will not be a backward class. That's the second thing that Mandal judgment says. It says that a state well may evolve its own criteria. What it did say that you cannot have a criteria only and exclusively based on economic criteria. It just says that you cannot have a criteria based exclusively and only on economic terms. And that is why Mandal judgment says that weaker section includes more than backward classes. It did identify that, all right, there can be a lot of hawkers, street hawkers, landless agricultural laborers, sweepers in those communities which are being termed as the forward communities. In fact, the change in court's thinking comes in Ashok Kumar Thakur. If we can have the judgment, para 156 of Ashok Kumar Thakur. That is at page number, because it records the arguments also of all the councils. So in para 156 of the Ashok Kumar Thakur judgment, a very interesting observation is made by Justice K.G. Balakrishnan, the Chief Justice then of India, as he then was. In para 156, he says, on the other hand, it is possible that within a caste group, there is a marked inequality of status, opportunity, or social standing, which then defines the class within that particular caste system. For example, all the Brahmins are not engaged in highly respectable employment, nor are all very wealthy. It may even be that some Brahmins may be servants of members of a lower caste, or it may also be that the personal servant of a rich Brahmin may be a poor Brahmin. So this caste class intersection, which the constitutional benches refer to, actually leaves a lot of scope for interpretation with changing times and and for the insertion of new provisions. Because on the day the OM was struck down, there was no enabling provision for economically weaker sections in the constitution itself. So now there is a basis. Now the whole test will be, can the parliament at all, we have this 156 of the Ashok Kumar Thakur judgment. Third line, for example, all the Brahmins are not engaged in highly respectable employment, nor are all very wealthy. It may even be that some Brahmins may be servants of members of a lower caste, or it may also be that the personal servant of a rich Brahmin may be a poor Brahmin. This is Justice K.G. Balakrishnan explaining the society as of today. Now, when Mandal Commission when the Indra Sani judgment struck down reservation only and exclusively on economic criteria, it struck down as there was no enabling provision. It did not say that it would violate the basic feature of the Constitution. So if weaker sections can be helped, and nowhere is any judgment saying that providing reservations or affirmative action only on the basis of economic criteria will be violative of basic feature of the Constitution of India, insertion of a new provision in the Constitution can be challenged only on the ground that the basic feature of the Constitution is violated. Indra Sani judgment said there cannot be any reservation in promotion. 16.4a and 16.4b were brought in to facilitate reservation in promotion and undo the Indra Sani judgment. Therefore, the question that lawyers have to ask themselves is, can similar exercise be done to provide for affirmative action program for any unidentified social groups? So that is where I will leave it.
Thanks a lot, Anirudh. May I request Swati to take over?
Thank you, Anirudh. That was like simply an awesome session. I wish we had some more sessions with you. As Pawan was saying, probably all of us who have attended the session have looked at Indra Sani from a new perspective, and you have really cleared the air so much that frankly, from my side, I would like to hear more from you. We have only discussed Indra Sani. Probably if we can have more sessions and more people can join in. The issue was we've had the session at a very short notice. So normally we have more than 30 to 40 participants. So I'm sure we'll try to put it on the YouTube for the benefit of many others. I was reading. I mean, this is not a question. It's more like from a point of view of discussion that reservation system. It should be on a rotation basis because those who were backward earlier are no longer backward after a period of time. So you have mentioned that it has to be dynamic, but what is your opinion about that?
See, this Indra Sani judgment also talked about inclusion and exclusions of communities and groups, right? But unfortunately, as we have seen, though we are discussing on a legal and constitutional claim, on the ground it does not work out like that. It has its own political costs. and it has its own political virtues or whatever vices that we cannot discuss because we are not competent to discuss that. We'll need a political commentator for that. So, of course, the rule is there for some review, but you also cannot push someone out of the system without adequate survey or without an adequate commission pointing out that a group has already advanced.
That criteria is not being laid.
That is why the most feasible method is to divide the groups into subgroups, for which the test of data may not be that strict.
But yeah, as Pavan was saying, the range is more to include more. The list is only growing. The list seems to be growing. That's all. More and more want to be included in the OBC list or the BC list. So,
see, I mean, and everyone wants a good share of the pie, so that's natural. Only problem is our system, because maybe apart from legal perspectives, political perspectives also come into operation. The review is not that effective, and a lot of deserving people, therefore, from the backward communities may not be getting help of these affirmative action programs.
Yes.
Including reservation.
Yes. Yeah, it is already happening because of the criteria laid down. Already those who are included in the list are not getting the benefit.
And that's more of a point that how do you ensure that the list actually operates and achieves the object that it seeks to achieve?
Yes. So to conclude, we thank you, Mr. Anirudh, because I mean, in this context, we know what Rajiv Gandhi has said, that only 15 paise of 1 rupee reaches the poor man. Similarly, the benefit of reservation, I'm presuming this is what is the outcome of what we've heard today, that the reservation exists in India, but whether the actual communities are benefiting from such reservation is a moot point raised by Shri Anirudh, which is definitely very relevant in today's times. Mr. Anirudh, if you've written any article on this issue, it will be great. I'm sure it will benefit many others. So we're looking forward for more such inputs from you. And then we'll be glad to have you some other time again on this issue. Thank you so much.